at the beginning of the meeting, and that Commissioner Del Rosario will be joining us in progress. Commissioner Fong is out this time. And so let's get this meeting started. And Mr. Freed, if you would please take roll.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Graham.
Hi, here.
Commissioner Javindel.
Present.
And Chair McCroskey.
Present.
And Vice Chair Fong and Commissioner Del Rosario are absent.
Great. I'll make sure that I go in order. Our first order of business tonight is public comment. And this is time to comment on items that are not otherwise on the agenda this evening. And do we have a large meeting?
Currently, no, not currently.
Okay, so let's go ahead and give 3 minutes. And if you would please raise your hand if you're attending and you wish to comment during this period, and then staff will call on you. We'll give you 3 minutes. We won't respond necessarily to what you have to say because we're restricted as to discussing things that are on the agenda. But we may be able to give you some resources, point you to some resources.
Mr. Chair, I'm not seeing any hands raised at this time.
All right, last call for public comment for items not otherwise on the agenda tonight.
I'll just note there were several comments submitted to the commission directly that were posted on with the agenda.
Right, so we do have some correspondence, so we can pick up on any of those things for future agenda items if we choose. So if there still aren't any hands raised for public comment, then we'll proceed to our presentation of monthly police data on collisions and citations.
Thank you, Chair. This is reporting for the month of April. There were 0 pedestrian collisions reported, 2 bicycle collisions reported, 10 vehicle collisions, 2 of which were injury collisions. 13 moving citations were issued and 1 DUI arrest. And the details on the 2 cyclist involved collisions were both on Solano Avenue. One was involved a bicyclist approaching Masonic Avenue on the north sidewalk. Vehicle was westbound on Solano at Masonic, where there was a red light, and proceeded forward to make the right on red when they didn't see any oncoming traffic, and the bicyclist turned left to go southbound in the east crosswalk and collided with the front right side of the Volvo, and it was a complaint of pain, only injury. The second was a bicyclist going westbound on Solano approaching Stanage on the south sidewalk. A vehicle westbound on Solano as well, approaching Stanage, and the bicyclist went north in the east crosswalk and collided into the left rear of the vehicle, and minor injury was reported. And the other report is that the police department is looking into the request regarding reporting on citations issued in relation to specific collisions reported, and I'll report back when I hear more from them. That concludes my report.
Great. Thank you for that enhanced detail. Are there any commissioner questions? Seeing none, are there any public comments or questions related to this information? If so, raise your hand using the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen.
Again, Chair McCroskey, I'm not seeing any hands raised at this time.
Okay. I guess I can look for that too, can I? So I'll do that next time. Great.
Sorry.
Bring it back to the commission. Any comments or requests based on this information? Great. Thank you, staff, for presenting that information. And we will move right along to our consent calendar. We have 2 items on the consent calendar.
We have, sorry, excuse me, we have one more presentation.
Oh,
this
I'm
month.
sorry. Please.
Shared mobility.
Shared mobility.
This is every other month now, so makes it a little more confusing. The gig car share reported 204 active members in March and 227 in April. And they reported trip starts of 498 in March and 531 in April. And the other reports from gig staff was they let us know that they made a rate change for all day rentals from $85 weekday and $89.99 weekends, shifting to $94.99 a day. But minute and hourly rates have been kept the same. And they've also reported donating over 500 vehicle hours to reimburse members for 1-hour trip to support vaccination, which they were proud to report on. That concludes my report.
All right. Any commissioner questions? Seeing none. Any public comment on the shared mobility information? I'm not seeing any there either, so I'll bring it back to the commission. Any comments or opinions? All right. Thank you, staff. We appreciate receiving that information bi-monthly, and it's great to see it sort of tick along and be on a current uplift and know that car share is still available. It's great. Now, if it's all right, I will move on to the consent calendar, which this time consists of our meeting minutes from April and a request for short-term parking adjacent to 1370 Marin Avenue. Do any of the, let's start with commissioners. Do either of the commissioners wish to pull any items from the consent calendar? Okay, I believe the procedure is next. I open to the public for comment and interest in pulling items from the consent calendar. So use the raise your hand button if you are interested in asking for an item to be pulled from the consent calendar. Looks like we've got at least one.
And I believe that's our applicant for this item.
Oh, great. Okay.
Mehdi, please feel free to go ahead for 3 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Hello, everyone. Actually, I'm the applicant of 1370 Marine Avenue. And I talked to Justin and in regards to the problem for the parents of the daycare that I owned for the drop-off and pickup. And in terms of the safety that is my concern. So when I talked to Justin and they suggested versus Santa Fe, which is already have the restriction from the Marine Elementary School for curb unloading and I don't know what you exactly call it, but anyway, it's a wide curb there. So they suggested that 3 parking space green curbs for my preschool. I saw 2 opponents, my Jason neighbor in Marine Avenue, that was complaining that some parents usually park in front of her driveway, and this is the exact problem that I want to solve. by allocating some parking space for parents. And the other neighbor in Santa Fe has opposite argue against that. But the problem is, first of all, I'm not sure they understood that it's 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening restrictions. The rest of the day, it's free for everyone who wants to park. And the other problem, when they talk on behalf of neighborhood, I think they just talk about on behalf of themselves, because the neighborhood doesn't have the problem. And I guess it's going to solve the problem. So everyone is going to be safe at the drop off and pick up time. The neighbor that has complained in Santa Fe Avenue, he has 5-6 cars and never he uses the driveway. And at least 2 of his cars always is parked in front of my property in Santa Fe Avenue. So I think they didn't understand my purpose of having this, and I'm asking and I'm paying to solve the problem, but it seems they don't see the problem and they just want to have more space to park for themselves and not using the driveway, which they have. They have a long driveway. This is my concern that I wanted to share with you. All I'm thinking is about the safety of children and community, which I'm serving this community with a safe environment, with a nice program in my daycare. Thank you so much. I tried to finish it on time.
And you did. Thank you for your comments. Help me out here, staff. So at this point, we've merely asked if anybody wants to take something off the consent calendar. So is this the time to comment in general on that, or if we take an item off, do we then have an additional public comment on that item? How does the flow go?
Typically, the first request would just be a brief, please take it off, and then you would, either ask, there'd be either a staff presentation or just what just happened. We just give that person the opportunity to speak publicly, and now the commission can discuss it if they wish. But generally, there's 1 3-minute comment period for each public speaker. So in this case, by kind of pulling it off and receiving the comment at the same time, which is fine, I think it'd be appropriate for, unless there's another, well, we do have another member of the public with a hand raised, so perhaps you take that second comment and then the commission can discuss the action that's before you.
Okay,
Does that answer your question?
Mostly. It sounds like by allowing public comment, we've essentially taken it off of the consent calendar. So let's consider it taken off of the consent calendar at this time and take at least the 1 and possibly more public comments. So the next comment would be from Amy Smullins.
Amy, please go ahead.
Hi there. So I appreciate what the owner of the school is trying to do, but in my opinion, when he talks about the safety of the kids, you got to think of the safety of the kids who are riding their bikes to Marin School in the bike lane. And right now I know the Marin School is being prepared to be redone, reconfigured, and they're putting in all these new bike racks and all this. And to me, putting a loading zone, a 54-foot loading zone, literally right before Marin School, where kids are going to be coming, and having parents at the same time that the kids are riding to Marin School, impatient parents or rushing parents just cutting across back and forth and back and forth. That's like the worst possible place for a loading zone. I mean, it just seems like it's completely compromising the bike lane. It's degrading the bike lane, and it's putting those kids and those parents at risk. And I mean, I completely understand and agree. No one owns the place in front of their street, in front of their house. So I don't have any, any great feelings for the people who want to park 6 cars in front of their house or anything. But I mean, I don't understand why if parents want to take their kids, drive their kids, they can't drive them a block away or 2 blocks away or something, find a legal place to park wherever it is, and then walk a block or 2 with their kids to school. I'm not saying everyone has to ride or everyone has to walk. They're pre-K, they're young kids. Leave the house 5 or 10 minutes earlier, find a place to park, and then walk to school. It just seems like doing this is completely degrading the Marin bike lane just in the place where it needs to be safe. I just think it's not it's not a fair trade-off. It's the times that the kids are coming to school, to Marin School also. So I think that's my feeling. I think people can park where they can legally park, walk a couple blocks, take their kids. That's this, that's that. Then everyone can get to school safely. Thank you.
So I don't see any additional speakers at this time. So I'd like to bring it back to the commission. And I guess the question would be at this time, do the commissioners feel that we should have a staff presentation, or would you like to just address this?
I'm happy to just discuss it.
Commissioner Graham, is that acceptable? Great. Who would like to start? Please. There's only 3 of us. Speak for
Yeah, I think there's good points being made. Having a safe pickup drop-off zone is a good thing to have at a school, especially preschool where people are going to be walking their kids in. I guess the question, sort of responding to what Amy suggested we not do, is if Marin is a not good place because of the bike lane, which makes sense, how about Santa Fe? Just put it around the corner on Santa Fe. And I think that has an advantage in the sense that if you want to use the drop-off zone on Marin as proposed, the only way to get to it is from eastbound Marin. Whereas if you put it around the corner on Santa Fe, no matter which direction you're coming from, except northbound on Santa Fe, you can get to it. Either direction of Marin, you can turn onto Santa Fe southbound and stop in front of the school. Santa Fe southbound, you can stop in front of the school. So you have 3 times as many ways to get to it on Santa Fe as on Marin, and it's not right next to the bike lane. So if we're looking for an alternative to solve that problem, that's the direction I would propose.
Right. Commissioner Grant.
I was going to ask staff if that had been considered. So staff, has that been considered?
That was considered. The applicant actually prefers Santa Fe. The reason that we recommended Marin was the initial approval of the conversion and use included condition to really focus the access and loading onto Marin. At the time, the concern was over existing loading behavior and congestion with the activity on Santa Fe at school time. So that was the direction that was given during the approval of the change in use. So we made our recommendation consistent with that. The only other factor I would say, I think you would avoid the bike lane nicely with the Santa Fe. You would have the potential, if elementary school drop-off was going to utilize this too, you might encourage some folks to cross without going up to the crosswalk would be the risk associated with that. Whereas on Marin, they're sort of in line to cross at the crosswalk. That would be the only other factor I would mention at this point.
I would echo some of those points. I spent a lot of time as a Safe Routes to School volunteer running a program of opening doors for drop-off at Marin School, and have spent a lot of time at that intersection and observed a lot of behavior. The running across the street currently occurs to the preschool. And it's sometimes parents and kids. And this would hopefully, this location would hopefully encourage any Marin families or students to use the crosswalk to get to school because it's in line with it. I guess I see the pickup and drop off for preschool is going to be a little different. It's more like kindergarten. And in fact, I'm assuming that that the parents have to actually sign their kids in and out. So they're going to be parking, getting out of their car, walking the kids in, and then coming back out. It's not the kind of quick open the door, throw the backpack out kind of drop off we see a lot with elementary schools. So I don't see it as a high volume. Now, if the elementary parents are using it as well, which I would expect, then there will be some of that, but the predominant preschool usage would be slower. I also have to say, there just aren't a lot of kids biking in the bike lanes on Marin. I don't see that as a major exposure. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later tonight. It seems like a reasonable balance for me to have the drop-off zone in front of Marin School primarily for the elementary school, but also legally able to be used by the preschool parents, and the drop-off zone then on eastbound Marin, which you would get to from in eastbound direction for use primarily by the preschool and somewhat by the elementary school. I was involved. I had kids at the school when the preschool initially went in, and I think there was a lot of feeling at the school at the time that it was just too much to have two schools so close together. I think time has shown that that's not as big an issue as many people feared, and so whereas initially they were blocked from having a pickup and drop-off zone, I think it's appropriate to allow such a facility to have that. That being said, I've been heavily involved in encouraging families to walk and roll to school, and would encourage the preschool to emphasize that actively transporting yourself and your students to school in the morning is a great way to get the day started and have the kids arrive active and alert. And I would encourage you to continue to do so. End of commercial. Any other responses from commissioners? Can I get a motion?
I'll make the motion to change. I guess the question is how of the actual distance on Santa Fe rather than Marin, but so I guess I'd like to discuss what we think the appropriate distance would be, whether it's 40 feet or 60 feet, I guess, assuming 20-foot parking spaces. So I will make the motion after discussing with the other commissioners the length of moving it to Santa Fe. What was the original application? If they requested it on Santa Fe, was it originally for 3 parking spaces, or what was the original request? Or actually, I guess they have the same situation there where there's a driveway as well.
They didn't specify number of parking spaces. That was developed in conversation with staff. Just doing a quick measurement, it looks like it's about 95 feet. So it's a longer frontage between the red curb and the driveway on Santa Fe.
Okay. I don't know, Commissioner Javandal, do you have any suggestion on that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we can fit 3 car lengths there very easily. The only question be, do we take a 4th space as well, or leave that, as a regular parking space? In light of some concern over parking pressures, which isn't really my primary concern here, maybe we, do a 3-space green zone. Probably a little more than 54 feet would be good. I think if it's 95 feet, if we go to 70 to 75 feet, that makes 3 car lengths easy to get in and out.
Yeah, I would actually, just looking at it here, would encourage us to actually paint the red further in to, if I'm looking at it on Google or Street View, but it looks like it's only painted red, maybe 15 feet. So that even that bulb out area is a parking spot. So maybe we should paint it red up until the end of the bulb out and then try to fit the appropriate amount of green afterwards. I would share my screen, but I don't know if I can do that.
I'm looking at the Google Street View as well.
See where that van's parked?
Yep.
I
If
would don't,
on the approach to the intersection, I think that would be, definitely something we'd want to put more priority on, since it's on the departure side from the intersection. I don't feel like it's creating as much of a sightline problem for a crosswalk.
that's true. Okay, well, what motion shall we make? Can we just make a motion that the staff find the appropriate, based on sort of internal direction to find 3 spaces of green on Santa Fe that work in front of the preschool? Is that an appropriate motion? Help me here. This might be my first motion.
Commissioner Del Rosario. Just so you know, we've pulled the second item from the consent calendar and are discussing it.
Great, thanks, Chair.
Chair McCrusker, I just note that the applicant has raised his hand again. Let me know if you'd like to.
We can certainly check in. I didn't see their hand go down at all.
I did lower the hand.
Well, let's see. Let's finish off with this idea of what an appropriate motion is.
So I would be happy to second a motion to approve 3 green zone spaces on Santa Fe, with staff working out the details of the exact location and length.
Thank you. I meant for re-articulating, not for seconding it. That would probably be inappropriate.
I'm sorry, I missed that. Re-articulating.
Nothing, it's fine,
Okay.
never mind.
Well, let's check in with our applicant. And maybe 2 minutes max.
Thank you again. I just wanted to mention, I don't want to bother my community and neighborhood with this. Actually, this is the best if we have it on the Santa Fe, and we actually discussed that with Ann and Justin first to have it there, but in terms of the consideration that they had, they suggested to go to the Marine. So this is the best because parents, due to the CDC guidelines and everything, they cannot come inside the building, but we have 2 separated doors for different classrooms. So they come from this side and easily they can drop off their children. And as you said, sir, they have to escort the children to drop off. It's not a kindergarten or a school with regulation that they can just drop them off. They have to sign in and have a signature to, they have dropped off at the preschool. But I think 3 is enough, and we can have 1 more space for neighborhood, whoever wants to use it. That would be more appropriate, I think, based upon what we need to make the safety and what neighborhood and community needed. Thank you so much. That's all I wanted to share with you, my opinion.
So I believe we have a motion and a second. I'd like to do a little further discussion. I would say that I prefer the green zone on Marin, and one of the reasons is because of the cacophony that happens around pickup and drop-off time, especially drop-off time on Wednesdays. But in the morning, Santa Fe gets backed up quite a ways, and because of the drop-off nature, there's just a lot of action going on the east side, northbound lane of Santa Fe, and cyclists coming through at that time are quite challenged to stay safe and find a path. And I think if that action was going on both sides of the street, that would make things a lot worse. There is traffic on Marin, but it's not the same as what's going on in front of the school. Other discussion? Let's take a vote on the motion then. And Commissioner Del Rosario, I'm assuming that since you came in the middle, you probably sit this one out, or if
Yeah,
you
I'll
feel
abstain.
strongly. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, Commissioner Graham,
Yes.
Commissioner Javando,
Aye.
Commissioner Del Rosario,
Abstain.
and Chair McCroskey.
No.
So the motion does not carry, correct?
Motion does not
the-
carry.
It would be a 2-to-1 of the members public. So, I'm sorry, you're right. There's not a majority.
There's not a quorum with only 2 voting aye, I believe.
Right.
Yeah. Would anybody like to propose another motion? I'll give it a go, seeing no other. I propose that we recommend the plan as submitted by staff with the green zone on Marin.
Second that.
Discussion?
I think that a time-limited drop-off zone makes sense. If we've got 2 options and one doesn't work, we go with the other. I'm fine with that. I hope that the school will advise the parents dropping off the kids to watch for people in the bike lane though.
All right. Any other discussion? Mr. Freed?
Commissioner Graham,
Do you want to pass and we'll come back to you?
No. I will vote yes.
Commissioner Javando,
Aye.
Commissioner Del Rosario,
And sorry about that.
Chair McCroskey.
Aye.
Motion carries.
I will commit to going and watching how it works. And if it's an issue, I'll propose to bring it back. Great. So Commissioner Del Rosario, just so you know, we're expecting to be only 4 commissioners tonight. And glad you could join us. So we need a motion on the rest of the consent calendar, which consists of our minutes.
I'll move approval of the consent calendar consisting of the minutes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Freed. Oh, I'm sorry, any discussion? Mr. Freed, please take the vote.
Commissioner Del Rosario,
Yes.
Commissioner Graham,
Yes.
Commissioner Javando,
Aye.
Chair McCroskey.
Yes. Motion carries. All right. So now we're going to move into the discussion and action section, section 5 of our agenda. And we're going to start out with the Marin Avenue Rehabilitation Project. Staff, can you give us an introduction?
Thank you, Chair McCroskey. As with last month, this item will be presented by Ernest Clock from Zoom Engineering, who has been managing this project. I'll hand it over to Ernest.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome.
Nice to see you again. I'm excited to share my screen here. Let's see. And bring to you the results of our investigations. Apologize for the slow start a little bit here. Okay, everyone seeing that okay? All right, good. We're back here with you to discuss the Marin Avenue project. We've done some good work with our consultants and extensive meetings with city staff, and we feel like we'll be able to address a lot of the issues brought up at last month's meeting. So we hope to briefly revisit the as-is project as it was presented last month. We'll then dive into the alternatives that we've studied, specifically the fourth leg crossing at each intersection. That one was pretty straightforward. We'll then talk about some design challenges that we had in looking at the following alternatives: parking protected bike lanes with painted bollards, protected bike lanes with hardscape, and the parking impacts and truck turn impacts that those alternatives had us realize. We'll talk briefly about the pros and cons, and then we'll look at the cost elements for the alternatives, and then talk briefly about the pavement management plan and ADA settlement agreement constraints and or other considerations, and then we'll open it for questions. So quickly, the as-is project, as presented last time, we are looking at the existing lane configuration up top, sorry, and the proposed lane configuration as presented last time, where we add a 2-foot buffer and reduce the median turn lane to grab that width. I just want to highlight that in the last presentation, it was conveyed as a $4.1 million project. That was a $3.7 million base engineer's estimate with the 10% contingency. So we've removed that contingency for the numbers in this presentation to look at the alternatives, so that we weren't adding this 10% and just talking about numbers that kind of were more subjective. So we wanted to keep it focused on the actual engineer's estimate cost. So if there's any question, we can dive into that further, but that's pretty straightforward. So we're calling them alternative elements because we felt like the discussion that we had with you and the feedback that we got wasn't really to develop 4 distinct alternatives around each element. It was really go back and look at what makes sense. And so we looked at protected bike lanes with hardscape protection. That's kind of this alternative. Protected bike lanes with paint and bollards, the fourth leg crossing, and these bulb out extensions. And so we're just going to be referring to the elements because it was easier to convey the constraints and the costs associated with each element rather than 4 different project alternatives. So you'll see in the actual one that we're talking about, we kind of mix the elements together so you could see what a final project might be. So the simplest one was adding that fourth leg crossing with bulb outs. This adds roughly $250,000 to the base $3.7 million project cost. It really was to address the issue where instead of this, this is not an existing crossing. So we have 3-leg crossings at most intersections with a few exceptions. Where you didn't have a crossing, we were talking a lot about a barrier, a landscaped area, something to comply with ADA and preclude people from making that crossing. And so the feedback from the commission was consider that 4th-leg crossing. It's pretty straightforward to do. These numbers are very rough that we're talking about because adding this 4th leg can impact drainage structures and would need further study to refine this alternative cost. But in general, it's feasible and it adds about that 250, less than 10% of the overall project estimate at this point. So the design challenges with the other elements. We use NACTO as our reference, and they talk a lot about cycle tracks in NACTO and have standards. When we look at flipping the parking and the bike lane, we call it floating parking. Floating parking with hardscape or floating parking with painted buffer, they both pose challenges to sight lines, sight visibility for vehicles. They both severely impact parking, and you're losing up to 50% in most areas, average 55% across the project. You're also not complying with NACTO recommended widths. So because of the curb to curb width and the improved street width, we have 9-foot available width for the area instead of 11 feet. And so we're not strictly adhering to NACTO guidelines. A little bit more about this site visibility. When you have a driveway, this would be the home side, and this would be the street side. This would be your flipped bike lane, so it's now in the previous parking lane, and you have this buffer. NACTO says you need this view triangle for driveways and intersecting streets and recommends that there be no parking in this area so that vehicles have plenty of sight distance to navigate across that bike lane and enter the vehicular lane. So those are some of the considerations we had with 1 and 2, the floating parking and flipping that. The Refuge Islands, that's this concept up here. This is not part of our plans. We'll have a drawing coming up. But in general, we found that these parking islands, because of the way they nose out, they really interfere with large vehicle turning movements. And that would include your fire apparatus, delivery trucks, any other large vehicles that use the corridor. And then lastly, there's sort of a reduced width here. And so street sweeping vehicles, standard ones anyway, wouldn't be able to fit in here, and there would be some issues associated with getting these streets maintained, cleaned. And we also considered that the heavy parking loss, delivery vehicles, landscape vehicles, visitors, other people dropping stuff off, it may impact parking. And so these were all things that were challenges that we found in doing the analysis. So here we have sort of this a melding of these different alternatives in one representative stretch. So we took a look at Ramona to Carmel. We've identified the driveways here. This would kind of be like the downhill direction or westbound direction of Marin, and this would be eastbound or uphill direction. I guess we considered the hardscape protected on the uphill for uphill cyclists going slower, and wanted to just show that element and what it kind of does on this side between Ramona and Carmel. And with the downhill element, you can just see that when we apply this NACTO site visibility guideline for exiting driveways, you lose all the parking spaces along here, and you're left with this one here, and then another one up here, just east of Carmel. So the parking impacts were pretty severe. And then we went ahead and looked at that 4th leg crossing and these refuge islands and kind of how that worked. And so we've just presented that alternative configuration to you here. Here I'm highlighting the 9-foot versus 11-foot issue. And this is just kind of some renderings of what the different buffers might look like. But generally the vehicular travel lanes and the median turn lane stay the same as our original concept. It's just flipping that parking and dealing with those refuge areas and the loss of parking. So we had CSG go ahead and look at all the different segments and just give us the number of driveways, the existing parking, and the parking lost for each segment. So you can see there's a wide variety here. Some we're not losing any parking, and others you're losing all the parking, with an average of about 51% of parking loss across that. So there's a parking analysis, and those impacts to parking would trigger additional planning efforts with all those affected neighbors to explain that parking loss to them and get that feedback from those neighbors. This is a truck turning exhibit. So this is a truck approaching and making this turn. This dark line is the outside wheel, and this light line is the inside wheel of a truck making this turn. And so they have to cross the refuge island in order to make that turn and navigate that turn safely. And so again, this is something that would need more study to be able to fully understand the impacts. But based on this concept level, high level concept, truck turns will be impacted severely on all the side streets with these refuge islands. So I'm sure there's more pros and cons than what we presented here, but this is kind of how we could distill it down. The fourth leg crossing adds pedestrian crossing options. It may slow traffic as multiple crossing legs may be used at the same time, and vehicles are slowing down and stopping to accommodate those pedestrians. And it does remove the need for a barrier at non-crossing locations. So those are the pros. It does add about $250,000 in cost to add that fourth leg. And then it really does add more paint and infrastructure to the upper area of Marin, where it's more suburban. The pros of the protected bike lanes. With paint and bollards, there's greater protection for cyclists, and with hardscape protection, they're obviously protected by a hard barrier. And so those are definitely pros in getting more protection for cyclists. But we found, again, a lot of parking loss and restrictions to residential access from the street. We're not meeting the recommended NACDA widths. There was the roadway regrading cost that was brought up by our designer. And so when you move that bike lane to the parking lane, the crown of the road makes the cross slope steeper than 5%. And so that's a pretty significant cost add for that option, adding about $800,000 in cost to correct that. It's a very high level estimate. We don't know what that is, but that's what CSG, our consultant, came up with for that. And again, the issues with getting road maintenance taken care of inside of that bollard and stripe area or hardscape area. And for the refuge islands, those decrease the pedestrian crossing distance, definitely a pro. Pedestrians are more visible. They're out in an island and making a shorter crossing across Marin. And it may slow traffic, which is also a plus when pedestrians and vehicles get together. The slower, the better. Again, parking loss, road maintenance access, the truck turns are constrained like we talked about. And another con would be adding pedestrian decision points on crossing. So they're crossing from a curb ramp across a bike lane, which is technically traffic. They're making that decision, and then they're stopping in a refuge island and engaging the vehicular traffic, stopping in another refuge island, and then crossing that bike lane again. So that's all we meant by additional decision points. And so we provide you some estimates. We've gone ahead and lumped all of the other project elements into one lump sum that stay common to each of the alternatives. Things like pavement rehabilitation, green infrastructure, signing, striping, and the RRFB systems, they're all common to the alternatives. And then we've shown you the unit cost, the original approach at about 3.7 million, option A at 4 million, and that's that $250,000 additional cost with the additional bulb outs. And then option B at 4.6 with that added cost. You get some savings in losing some of the other elements like the bulb outs and things, but you do add some cost in adding that pavement regrading in order to get that 5% crossover for your new bike lane. So some things we just wanted to talk about. I did some research on just how you guys come up with your paving, how Albany comes up with their paving plan and sort of the initial assumptions. In 2019, a candidate list was brought before City Council, and I believe it was the basis for approving an $11 million program over 5 years. At the time that list was developed, and as is typical with many agencies, there's not a lot of consideration for some of the elements we're looking at here in this presentation. And so what you end up with is Marin Avenue representing about 15% by length of that 2019 candidate street list. And when we take that and convert it to numbers, you know, it's roughly 2 million for Marin is what was anticipated. And now just with the base project, we're up to 3.7 million. And so that's really all it is it's eating into your ability, Albany's ability to affect more street improvements, the more expensive projects get. And so that's just a high level picture of how costs grow over time and how scope creep happens on projects. And it's something to consider when considering modifications to this project scope, further modifications. And then we also have an ADA settlement agreement that clearly identifies curb ramps on Marin shall be made accessible by the end of 2023. And so that is something also to consider, that delaying those improvements may create an issue with that settlement agreement. So something else to consider. And just as a reminder, staff recommendation, we're looking for feedback on that fourth leg crossing, proceeding with the proposed project as proposed previously, and then getting feedback from your commission on the fourth leg crossing and then the width of the bike buffer. As previously presented, it was 2 feet, and there's an opportunity to maybe increase that by taking further median widths and changing that a little bit. So per the staff report, we are looking for that feedback from you tonight. And with that, I will open it for questions.
Thank you for that presentation, for distilling down all of our requests into a comprehensible response. That's quite a feat in of itself. So let's start with commissioner questions. If there are no, I'm sorry, Commissioner Del Rosario.
Thanks, Chair McCroskey. I had a few questions, and maybe this is for staff, but Ernest, I know you talked about the funding plan and the available funds for this, and how further capital improvements just eat into the pot of available dollars. Does if we add hardscape elements that make this a complete streets project and not necessarily a repaving project, does that change the funding sources, potentially other sources that would be available to fund this project if we do indeed want to invest more into the street?
I think it would. I could have Justin weigh in on how Albany might compete for those funds, but grants are a competitive process and that would take time. But yes, I believe it would open the project up to additional funding sources.
That's correct. It would be competing for outside sources to fund that gap, not additional local sources that we could switch over. We would be going out for grants.
And then the second question is the timing of the project. Obviously, if we go for hardscape treatments as opposed to pretty much a repave with a restriping, there's potentially more impacts on the project, and probably a need for more public and community input and outreach. So is the timing of the project, if we went for a more involved design, does that matter in this case? And can we move things around to give us more time here? It felt like in the staff report that there was some sort of time limit that that staff was trying to adhere to.
Yeah, I think there would have to be extensive public outreach if you were going to remove 50% of the parking, in some cases 100% of the street parking in front of these, in front of everyone's home. Justin and Allison and I have talked about that at length, and it's my understanding that that was not council's direction when they approved the funding for this project. It was rehabilitate the streets and do ADA. So I think if that were the direction from this commission, it would have to go back to city council to explain to them that this project's not getting done within whatever time frame it takes to do that planning outreach effort. And I'm not familiar with that, but it would extend the time. And I don't think you would be building anything for maybe a year. I'm just guessing, and I don't know Albany's processes that well, but it will take time to do the outreach, hold the public workshops, get public feedback, and ultimately come back with that feedback to the various commissions, council, and considering all those improvements. So you'll definitely be outside of that ADA settlement window end of 2023 and being able to affect that, unless you're then phasing the project and doing curb ramps first on their own and putting off paving. But we did explore that with staff, and there are impacts associated with that. So if you do the bulb outs right at the corners, that will interfere with flipping the bike lane. And so it can be, lost resources when you're putting in bulb outs to decrease the crossings across Marin and then taking them out for flipping the lane. So it really makes sense to do it all right at once. But that just comes at the cost of extra time to do this planning effort.
And sorry, I have one or two more questions more on the technical side. Do we explore in plan and cross section or a sample of a segment of the roadway two-way cycle track, which seems to probably have less of a parking impact potentially, since one side would not have, could conceivably not have any parking impact, and then possibly it also helps with the street cleaning. I know that other cities have implemented two-way cycle tracks for those reasons.
Yeah, we did not study that, only because as soon as we identified that the flip the bike lane configuration would require planning efforts, anything similar to that would require planning efforts. And so that's really the issue before you tonight, I think, is do you want staff to go back and do more planning to look at a new ATP and a longer term effort in implementing either flip bike lanes, cycle tracks, or something much different than what was envisioned by your pavement management plan and just doing roadway surface and curb ramps. So.
Got it. And last technical question is the right turn movements for emergency vehicles and trucks making the right turn and crossing over the hardscape or softscape, whatever it may be. So would moving limit lines back in the opposing direction solve that? Or are there prohibitions of trucks on many of these cross streets anyways?
We talked briefly about that, and that again is changing the conditions pretty substantially. It would require further study at this point. We looked at moving the noses back, and that then creates a diagonal crossing, if you can imagine, into the island, and then the shorter crossing, and then another diagonal. So there's a lot of sight distance considerations that happen when you do that. 4 trucks, say, stopping for pedestrian further back and then making that right turn. We did consider stuff like that, but when it came to that, we didn't do any further study on that noting that it would just sort of really change the geometry of the intersection.
Right, that does it for me. Thanks.
Yeah, let me just ask a follow-on question that's related here. I guess I'm assuming that anything beyond the fourth leg crossing issue would require going back to council. Is that a reasonable assumption? That the fourth leg crossing is sort of in our peer view in this project, but anything above and beyond that would need to go to council.
Yeah, with caveats that there could be minor tweaks to the striping widths. There's still some available width to move around with the bike buffer. Really, you're getting, there has been some discussion about 9-foot lanes, but we really didn't want to present that and talk about that because there's no precedent set for that, or 9.5. Really, 10 is kind of the minimum, and 11 feels comfortable. 12 being the Caltrans standard for lane widths. And we're not building a highway here, I get it, but there's a lot of standards associated with lane widths. So with the caveat that you can mess around with the lane widths a little bit, the fourth leg crossing is something that can be added. It's kind of within the purview. It's curb ramps and not having these other impacts to parking. But I would say that anything that impacts parking, you'd want to get the feedback from those affected before you implement.
Okay. Thank you. I don't mean to jump the gun here. Other commission questions? None from Javendal. Commissioner Graham? No. Okay. Well, then we need to move on to public comment. And I see that Jeremiah has had his hand up for a while, so let's go ahead and start with him. We're going to do 3 minutes.
Okay, Jeremiah, please go ahead. Jeremiah, you're muted, I believe. We can come back. How about if we come back to Jeremiah, we can go on to the others and try someone else.
Sounds good. I think Harry Chomsky had his hand up next.
Good evening. Thanks for considering this item and thanks for considering more ambitious bike infrastructure. So I sent a letter on behalf of Albany Strollers and Rollers and Bike East Bay. I hope you've had a chance to look at it. Since it's long and detailed, I wanted to just give kind of a brief summary to you in by voice tonight, which is we believe that a truly complete streets approach is warranted. We understand that that's probably not feasible in the scope of the project that you're considering right now, given time and budget pressures. But we would ask you to look ahead to a future with a complete street on Marin Avenue and think about ways that that could be done in the future and try to design the current project so that it's compatible with those future ideas. And we outlined 2 different visions of how cycle tracks on Marin might look. One of them is similar to what the consultant just showed you. The other one is completely different and involves using sidewalk space that the city owns that is currently used by some of the residents' yards, but could possibly be put to public use since it's city property. So for the former, I think the biggest concern about if you pour concrete in this project to keep the possibility of future cycle tracks at road level, the key would be to make sure that the bulb outs are islands or are done using bollards instead of concrete, so that there's a possible straight through line for a cycle track at road level in the future. And for the sidewalk level cycle tracks, the key concrete pouring detail would be to make the curb ramps wide enough to accommodate a pedestrian sidewalk and cycle track along each sidewalk. So I hope you'll at least look at those elements, even if we acknowledge that some of our ambition here is not really practical for the project you're doing right now. I had another question on my own, separate from Albany Strollers and Rollers, listening to the presentation about the NACTO standards for setbacks and sightlines and all of that. And I'm just wondering if the design that uses with the bike lanes out in the street the way they are now also has NACTO standards, and if the parking and setbacks and everything that are in place right now are compatible with the NACTO standards. I would just hate for there to be a situation where we have a substandard bike lane that doesn't meet NACTO guidelines, and we're considering upgrading it to a proper cycle track, and we say, well, to meet NACTO guidelines, we have to get rid of all this parking, so we'll just keep the bike lane, but maybe the bike lane already violates NACTO guidelines. I don't really know. So that was my question for you. Thanks.
Thank you. Should we try Dan Johnson next?
Hello, this is Dan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Thank you to the staff and consultant for the work that you've done looking at other options. I want to say, I think you have no choice but to put in a protected bike lane. How you do that is up to your expertise, but here's why. The city of Albany has a complete streets policy, which I'm sure you've read. I'll read it for everyone's benefit here. All transportation improvements in the city of Albany will be planned and implemented to provide safe access for children and adults to walking, biking, and public transit facilities. So if you proceed with a bike lane that's known to be unsafe, that both NACTO and FHWA say is not safe and won't be used by all ages and abilities, how are you meeting that policy? We could go on. The Albany Climate Action Plan has another quote I could read. The city's transportation element, policy T 1.3 says, the planning, design, funding, and implementation of any construction, reconstruction, maintenance, alteration, or repair of the transportation network should consider ways to make streets safer and easier to navigate for all users. And exceptions to this policy may be considered consistent with the Complete Streets resolution, which I just read. So I think seeing the presentation, if there's not enough space for parking and for a protected bike lane, it means there's not enough space for parking. I'm sorry to say. If there's a part in city policy that says people's right to store their stuff in the public right-of-way shall supersede everything else in the policy, I haven't found that yet. So I think I'll leave it at that. I'll let you guys work it out, but that's where I'd like to see this headed. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. How about Ian McLeod?
Ian, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So yeah, I'd want to just reinforce what the other speakers have said, and especially Dan Johnson's comment about really you have no choice if you're really following all city guidelines, city policies, and NACTO guidelines as well, which when it comes to this street, NACTO is very explicit. It says protected bike lanes where motor vehicle speed consistently exceeds 25 miles per hour, where daily motor vehicle volume is higher than approximately 6,000 vehicles per day, where curbside conflicts are expected, or wherever there is more than one motor vehicle lane per direction, you have to put protected bike lanes. And then it's also consistent with our climate action and adaptation plan and with our transportation guidelines in terms of reducing vehicle miles, creating mode shift to cycling. For me, the big picture is creating a protected network of cycling all around our city that will then be used as a complete, as part of a complete streets plan that will be used for a safe routes to schools network. For me, the big thing here is you have an elementary school on the street. You have another one, Cornell Elementary, which is not far off. You've got Ocean View, which is even further down, that could be part of a complete streets protected bike network because it has the Buchanan bike path to it. This should all be linked and a complete and continuous network to make it safe for all our kids to get to school. I've been working on getting more bike parking at Marin in the new redesign. And I've been looking at this street. It's a very wide street. You have 3 lanes there, and I see that middle lane being empty like 99% of the time. And I understand there are traffic flow issues, left turn issues, but if you see one of them, look at one of the diagrams I sent, if you get rid of that middle lane, you have plenty of room for parking and for a bike lane. So what I'm asking from you is some creative thinking, creative problem solving to look at how wide the street is. Nobody's looked at that middle lane. Everybody, some people say, oh, you can't get rid of it, traffic will be backed up. But I think you need to study peak volumes. I think you need to study how it could be reconfigured somehow. Maybe there's some mini roundabouts at some intersections. You could certainly reduce the left turn lane to 1 vehicle at most streets, maybe 2. This should not be a street almost any different than most of the other east-west streets from El Cerrito all the way through Berkeley that are 2 lanes. Albany is really getting nothing out of this high-speed, high-volume street except hazards and dangers for our kids, and it divides our city. It's unsafe. The current bike lane is unsafe. You have distracted drivers, and you have the right hook risk right there. The current bike lane is not adequate. So I think you really need to redesign the whole street and do a whole complete streets project. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Let's try Jeremiah Pinguello again.
Jeremiah, please go ahead.
Jeremiah, if you're talking, we can't hear you. We'll give it a few more seconds. I think we need to move on to Nick Peterson.
Hello,
All right.
this is Jeremiah.
Oh, there's Jeremiah. Okay. Jeremiah, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Ken. Appreciate it. Yeah, I was doing a lot of research on this. I'm all for safety. I mean, safety first, right? I mean, this transportation commission used to be called Transportation and Safety. Hey, why did you guys take safety out of the name of this commission meeting? I'm just curious. Maybe because you guys don't think safety is important? I don't know. Because this used to be transportation and safety. And I remember in a meeting, I said, maybe we should change it to safety and transportation because safety comes first. But you guys just went ahead and took the whole word safety out of it. So to me, it kind of seems like you guys don't care about safety. It's going to take the word safety out of this whole commission because it's traffic and safety, or it's transportation and safety. I don't know. Yeah, it was traffic and safety, and you renamed it to just transportation. But safety is still a part of it. Safety is number 1. I mean, hasn't anybody heard about Cal-OSHA? I mean, everybody's heard about Cal-OSHA. We can't risk somebody dying because we're mismanaging on how to put paint on the ground. I was just reading just now, and if a rider is going fast enough, they could take the lane. They could take the whole lane. You don't even have to stay in a bike lane. I'm on Google right now with California bicycle laws and all these things. And I know I'm at you guys right now about safety, and a gentleman a couple of speakers ago was about safety. That's because it's important. It's because it matters. That's why you got all these people, public comment, talking about safety, bike safety. And we're going to have children. And that's why we're really holding the city to these policies, is because they're written, and this is what the city is supposed to be going by, is to provide a safe route to get to these places. And, safe routes, we need signs. We need more fluorescent, reflective, bicycle lane signs. and if it's kind of interesting because if you make a bike lane to where there's bollards or something, it's kind of hard to get in and out of the bike lane. Kind of have to get it in the beginning or the end, you know, but I think that Albany needs, you know, more bike lanes to promote a healthier community as long as it's safe. And I think it's great. So just keep everything safe, please.
Thanks for your comments. Let's move on to Nick Peterson, sorry.
Yeah, hi, thank you, traffic commissioners and consultant. I appreciate being able to comment on this. As a pretty much lifelong cyclist in the East Bay, I've been riding my bikes on streets in the East Bay for over 50 years now and spent most of my commute times commuting by bicycle. And it always frustrated me how little priority bikes had. They don't get the right of way at intersections. Usually you're harangued by drivers of large vehicles for being in their way. People object to the bike paths. They constantly bemoan the fact that they remove parking. And it was really interesting sitting through this meeting. I sat through the earlier discussions about the drop-off at childcare. When I was a kid, we walked to school. You know, and if you brought your kid, you usually parked a distance away and walked them or something. But this idea that everyone's going to get in a car and drive where they want to go and have highest priority over everything. We need to start prioritizing pedestrians and bikes. We need to do it. Stop prioritizing the cars. Everyone's got a car. Everyone complains. Everyone wants this convenience, and we're killing the world with cars. And I think the whole idea of the complete streets is to make it safe for those of us, and there should be more, who are using active and non-polluting forms of getting around our city, not for people who are chugging up Marin, usually to go up into the hills of Berkeley, so they probably don't even live in Albany, and to make it an expeditious kind of east-west freeway through Albany up to where they are, or as someone else pointed out, to just load their vehicles onto the street so they're convenient to them, but not to anybody else. So I echo the message that Dan Johnson said, which is you need to do complete streets here. And as a member of the Climate Action Committee, I totally object to putting piles of concrete into the street that permanently lock us into certain configurations. Let's use paint and bollards where it's effective, even, you know, to be less expensive than doing all this concrete. If the law totally requires certain things like the truncated cone areas for indicating safe access to all and the visually impaired, yes, we need to do that. But I think there are ways to keep some flexibility. We don't know what kind of technology could be coming up. Maybe there'll be this back out blinker light that you can put on the street that when someone's backing out of their driveway, it sort of sets off a flash. And so people coming down the street know they're backing out. And in that case, it can help with you wouldn't have to eliminate all the parking. But as it is now, no one, you know, you can back out over a bike lane. No one gives a crap about that. And but the big concern is backing out through parking. So let's prioritize pedestrians and bikes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for your comments, all. And I'm not seeing any more raised hands. So I'm assuming that nobody else is, oh, we have one from Amy Smolens. And if anybody else is looking to talk, please raise your hand now before Amy finishes. Thank you.
Please go ahead, Amy.
Hi there. Sorry for the late ad. Yeah, I agree with the previous commenters that safety is important and we've got to prioritize cyclists and just, you know, Albany always says, oh, we're all about the schools. We're all about the schools. We should be all about the kids getting to school safely and safe routes to school and walking to school and biking to school and scooting to school and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, when I mentioned the Marin bike lanes in the previous item, people said, well, they're not really safe. Well, then let's make them really safe. So we've got to do something. So as Mr. Peterson said, our world stops burning up essentially. And now's the time to do it on our main thoroughfare. So let's do what we can do. Think outside the box, be bold, and make it safe for everyone to walk and bike and scoot. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody who gave public comment and to the extensive diagrams and letters we received. A lot of good information for us to digest. With that, I'd like to bring it back to the commission and see who would like to lead off with any further questions or comments. I don't think people are just not wanting to talk at all, but okay, Commissioner Javandel, please.
Thank you. Nothing comprehensive, just a couple of thoughts. When we first, it took us what, from 1998 to 2005 to seriously get the bike lanes on Marin implemented. That's when we started the transportation management plan for the city in 2005 was when we actually installed them. There was a lot of people who thought that going from a 4-lane road with no bike lanes to 1 lane each direction was going to just fail miserably. Several phrases were used. One was, it's just paint. So we went with the paint only approach rather than building all the concrete bulb outs at the time. The other was, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We could have gone on, and we would still be talking about it, would have no bike lanes on Marin at all at this point, if we hadn't at some point said, this is better than what we have, let's make it incrementally better. We can improve it more later. We've done it in pieces, segment by segment. So I'm not afraid of continuing that process. I'm not afraid of considering changes. The turn lane is important for turning on and off of side streets without stopping all traffic flow and causing frustrated drivers to decide they're going to drive in the bike lane instead of wait for that car that's turning. It allows people to turn in and out of their driveways. Driveways on Marin, if you want to make a left turn, the turn lane plays a big role. I'm really happy to see the designs that shrink the width of the turn lane. I think it's wider than what we need. Happy to see that change. Having worked on the layout design of the prior restriping, when we originally did the road diet, I know that the taper lengths for turn pockets and things like that, especially if you're going to do parking mid-block and eliminate the parking to add a turn pocket at the ends of the block, things like that. We don't have enough space to transition in and out for the lanes to shift. So I think either we have a turn lane or we don't have a turn lane. The turn pocket idea, while I love the creative thinking, I don't think it's going to fit. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think we would save hardly any parking by going with that approach. If I thought mini roundabouts would help us in lieu of a turn lane, I'd be interested in that too. But I'm a little concerned that if we want to protect the bike lane, then we put a mini roundabout that shoves traffic flow into the bike lane area. That would concern me. The other thing that was mentioned in the presentation is that narrow bike lanes are really hard to sweep. With a conventional sweeper, you can't do it. Even if you buy a narrow sweeper, probably need about 7 feet or more. There are some that are exceptionally narrow, but to pick up all the branches from the lovely trees that we've got on Marin, that as a kid walking to and from school, I used to love to pick up all those fallen branches. As a bike rider, I do not want those branches in my bike lane tripping me up. So I think a lot of people have said this. There are things that may take some significant design and planning process to figure out. And I'm not right now suggesting what the answer is, but if we need to slow down and say, hey, we can't do all the upgrades now. We may have to figure out what can we do now. Certainly sounds like meeting the ADA standards is important. And what does that look like for us? Does it mean just rebuild the corners where they are and put ADA ramps, or do we do bulb outs, or what? So I'll kind of leave that as a question because I'm not certain which way that should go. That's it for me.
Thank you. Next. Commissioner Graham.
Yeah, well, I think I'll start by saying I think that this item relates to the next item, which is the our work plan over the next 2 years. And I very much think that we need to revisit the whole conversation we're having holistically for the city as part of our work plan for the future. So I'll say that now for the next item, because I think we have two options, and I think it's, well, maybe three. It's that we, put a hold on this and, take it to the commission, or take it up to the commission to have them provide some direction. Continue the project as it was originally sort of designed, to allow it to go forward, assuming that it's an ADA and a paving project mainly. Or the one thing that I guess I think would be a possible interim motion would be for us to ask poor Mr. Clock to go back one more time and think about how we could redo the intersections with only any curb extensions that are needed for the ADA ramps, but not the bulb outs, to allow the repaving of the street, the ADA, and then really just paint in the bulb outs as have been suggested with the current bike lane configuration, so that we're not putting new curb and gutter where we might in the future want to make changes. And then but utilizing paint, and I don't know what those the floppy bollards are, to really protect the intersections for shorter pedestrian crossings, which I guess if the other commissioners supported it, I would be a motion that I would make, because I feel like that would allow us to move forward with the paving and the ADA improvements. And I think ADA improvements are very much needed and necessary, while leaving the flexibility for us then to advance the active transportation plan within the next year. And if we want to make more, talk about this as a bigger, broader community, that would then inform really any future design. So I would see that as a motion that allows us to carry this project forward for the CIP, pavement issues, while revisiting the bigger sort of safety concerns that we've had. So that's something I'm throwing out there to the commission to talk about as an alternative. And I guess, Mr. Clock, if you see any fatal flaws with that, I would also invite you to sort of answer it, or if you thought about it at all as any of your during your alternatives thinking, I would love to hear any thoughts on that you might have.
Yeah, we did talk about with the designer. The biggest challenge is strict compliance with ADA. Obviously, Albany is under a settlement agreement to be fully compliant with ADA. And in addition to the need for the truncated domes that need to be poured in a concrete pad, you have to have what's called a cane detectable edge for the seeing impaired. And so that just means a curb resides in that bollard painted area, that sticks up. And so it just becomes a trip hazard kind of if it's a curb just floating in space. And so that's why our consultant came up with this raised island. It's compliant with ADA, and it really protects people when they're waiting in that area to make a crossing from vehicles. Yes, it's only a 6-inch curb, but that 6-inch curb is standard for pedestrian protection the route. So we did look at something like that and basically decided if the commission really wanted to look at that, it would require more study, and we would go to an ADA expert and really come up with some kind of configuration
Yeah,
that kind of meets your intent. So.
if I can ask a follow-up question. So if you had the new ADA ramps at the existing corners where they are with the updated curbs, but then had the crosswalk stripes like at the ground, or I'm sorry, but then had, you know, paint on the street that sort of was this bollard, but wouldn't the curb line at the, where the curb actually is, still meet that requirement? Even though then you have like this painted, you know, bulb out area that's really essentially just part of the crosswalk?
It would be, but that would not reduce the crossing distance for the seeing impaired, right?
Correct. Okay. And is that part of the settlement? It's to reduce the crossing distance, or it's just to meet the requirements of the law?
No, it's just to meet ADA. That's just one of the goals in your existing ATP, was to reduce crossing distances. So
Gotcha. Okay.
we're trying to balance all those, and it's extremely tough.
No, I hear you.
Totally get all the public comment about the passion for this, and it's all feasible. It's just, I serve at your pleasure. So please send me anywhere you want and I'll study it.
Okay.
Thank you,
I'm done
Commissioner.
with my comment. Thank you.
Great. Commissioner Del Rosario.
Just briefly, my comments were along the same lines of Commissioner Graham and Commissioner Javendel, to meet the ADA requirements where we need to for the crossings, and then proceed with the project, but to advance elements that could lend itself to a future protected bike lane, or at least not preclude it. I think what Harry Chomsky from Strollers and Rollers outlined in his letter, I think sums it up well. And I would like to know more about the feasibility of that if Mr. Klopp or staff have reviewed his letter. And then I think there also needs to be some technical feedback that we need to provide on lane widths and maybe the size of the buffers. And if we can get to that point, maybe we should look at the cross section and figure out what would be best.
Great. So taking my turn, you know, this has become a pretty intense program of choices and options. And I'm very sensitive to the need on Marin for paving, for improving the ramps, for improving several of the stormwater drains that are currently coned off kind of in perpetuity because they're not functioning well. You know, it's been a long time since these issues have been addressed. And as Commissioner Javendal said, when they did the road diet, low those many years ago, it was paint and you know, paint and signage, and the road needs some help. I think we should at some point take a few minutes to talk about details of the options that are simpler, like the 4-lane crossing and the striping of the bike lanes, things that are within our purview. But when I look at the options on this, and I look at all the correspondence and listen to the comments, I'm inspired to try and do better, because we're really we're looking at things that can improve pedestrian and ADA access, and that's great. But this is a major thoroughfare, and it goes past one of our elementary schools. In this project, it goes within a block, and within and alongside another elementary school further down. This is a main thoroughfare, and one of the things I get asked all the time from people who aren't bicyclists are, why do bikes need to go on every road? And you know, my response is, I've had trouble coming up with a convincing response to a non-cyclist. But the truth is, people walking or on bikes want to go to all the same places that you want to drive and park in front of, drive to and park in front of. It's a network, and so I'm inspired to do better. I'm worried about soft bollards and 6-inch curbs, especially if trucks are going to have to mount them anyway. That doesn't feel very protective. There are several places in Albany where you can see the marks on the curb where the trucks have marked them, and we've had some problems with signal mastheads on tough corners like Solano and Masonic. When I look at all these details and when I think about compromises and what we could do in the short run, I'm most confounded by the shape of the road. If we do this paving project with, at the level of four-leg crossings, and what we originally set out to sort of consider, we're kind of locking in for 20 years the pavement, which really limits what we can do further down the road. And that concerns me a lot. So I think it behooves us to formulate a couple of options and send those up to council and get some more direction, because the expense of considering any kind of cycle track, either on the road or adjacent to the sidewalk, is just going to be expensive in terms of outreach. It's going to be a political issue, and expensive in terms of implementation. So I would propose, and I want to get some feedback on this, that we discuss what some broad brush options might be, starting with maybe whether we want to recommend 4-leg crossings and some details about the striping of the current plan, and then B, recommend to council that they give us some direction on the scope of the project and what we should be considering and prioritizing. Thoughts? Del Rosario?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Did council already give us that direction? I mean, I guess they've given it to us prior to all of this conversation, but is the direction from council to proceed with a repaving plan for Marin, and anything beyond that would probably move Marin out of the cycle for this project, and we'd have to rethink the funding and planning process?
That was spoken to a little bit earlier. It's my understanding that they gave the okay to select Marin as the target for this repaving, but they have not given any direction on going beyond the paving. Is that fair to say, staff?
Yeah, subsequent to the commission reviewing the pavement management plan, it was presented to council with the 2-year cycle of candidate streets, including Marine Avenue. So they've approved funding levels for the pavement management and the streets that we're going to advance, including Marine, but have not been brought the design yet.
So I guess what I'm saying is that within the scope of the straightforward design, I'll call it design A, we could ask council for direction. And if they said, we'd really like to get the paving done, do the best job you can within the scope of what you have already, and then whatever else they said, that we could come back at a future meeting and move this forward within the current cycle. But if they said, no, we want to find you some more money, we want to enlarge the scope of the project, then that would likely take this on a much longer path.
I guess I'll say to that I don't feel like there is another project. I think there's another planning effort, but I don't think you can really, I think you can do the intent of the project, which is the paving and the ADA. But beyond that, it's a planning effort. It's not a project anymore because you're going to have to go back to the beginning. I think, and I think if this goes to council, they're going to hear everyone that spoke this now. And I don't think that they're going to make a decision to go forward with it. I mean, I guess I'm not the council, but. So I guess what I'm saying is, to me, it seems like there's the minimal project that meets the intent, or it becomes just a long-term planning, and it essentially it's gonna just not happen, which is okay, because then it becomes a planning project. But then I think you're revisiting the whole street as a whole.
Could we have staff chime in on what they think that process would look like if we went to council and said we want to do a complete streets project? So what would be the ramifications of that with the proposal that's proposed by staff?
I think the ramifications were essentially what Commissioner Graham said. This would be on hold. We would probably proceed with other street segments that were in the upcoming pavement management plan. I don't know the ramifications in terms of our ADA settlement agreement deadlines, that we wouldn't be able to meet with that. But in terms of the project, we would proceed with other street segments that we can get into the queue for pavement management. And I think it would, to a certain extent, it is a decision back to the ATP and the active transportation plan update. We're talking about a change in the vision for the facility on Marin, and that has implications in terms of the broader city network that we're trying to deliver, and where we want to put our bicycle, funding resources to deliver that network. So I think in my mind, it's an active transportation plan update, and then it's alternatives analysis for what kind of facilities would deliver that on Marin, and planning process to settle on a design for that.
Commissioner Jamadal, any thoughts?
Yeah. I'm fine with the idea of pushing a complete streets project until later. And everyone should have a chance to weigh in and share their concerns and ideas, and be able to really vet a lot of the ideas that are being recommended by various people. I think there are many good ideas out there. A lot of them need to be vetted. The idea that we need to fix the cross slopes if we want to put the bike lanes adjacent to the curb, and that's going to cost us $800,000 just to fix the pavement, where adding the extra bulb outs is only going to cost us $250,000. Not that cost is the sole decider in any of this, but it feels like if we can do a relatively minimal project to fix the pavement, keep the bike lanes safe so that you don't hit a crack and crash, make the pedestrian crossings safer. This is not just a bike project. It's not just a car traffic. It's a pedestrian project. We need to fix the ADA ramps. That's important. I hate how long the crosswalks are. For that reason, I really like the bulb outs, even though I recognize that at least appears to preclude curbside bike lanes later. But you know what? You can tear out concrete too. It feels like a waste compared to the cost of fixing the cross slopes. I don't know. Either we push the whole project out until we can do complete streets project, in which case we're going to miss the ADA settlement criteria, and that may be a problem that council's not going to be thrilled to have us throw at them. They might want to proceed with something anyway. So if we do make a recommendation to council, I think we need something that preserves that ADA improvement at a minimum and buys us time. I'm somewhat tempted to go with the original project and say, let's do the original project, do a complete streets study, and if we end up having to take out bulb outs, we at least won't have to take out as many. I wish I liked the pedestrian islands better. I've tried those in various places, and they're tricky. You've got to have a concrete landing to put your detectable warning surface into, because it tends not to stick on the asphalt. So the cost is not trivial. You need the raised curb. The time you're doing all of that, you might as well have built the bulb out. The cost differential, I suspect, is not going to be that great, even if you use more material, but the material will be more clear. And I think more durable until we get around to changing it. I really appreciate the comments Commissioner Graham has made about trying to get at least part of the project done. And I would support something like that, recognizing that we need a complete streets process as well. We are not anywhere close to settling that, I think. That's my thought.
Thank you. I have a follow-on question for Mr. Clark. I guess I was assuming that the figure under option B, the $800,000 to correct pavement cross slopes at parking lane, I was assuming that was a cost when you're already doing a paving project, and that if you came back later to try and correct that, you would have to do the cost would be different. Am I wrong about that?
The $800,000 cost is the cost to correct the cross slope issue that currently exists in the parking lane. So as the roadway comes to the edge over the years, that pavement has been stacked, and it's called a quarter crown. A regular roadway crown is like this, and a quarter crown is like this, where parking kind of resides here. So it's to grind out that quarter crown and get the bike lane to less than 5%. And that's their high level guess. They haven't done a whole road profile to do all the estimates, but they just put $800,000 on that number to correct it. But I think if I were to take it a step further, you could invest that into the roadway. And maybe it's more than that, maybe it's less than that, but make it more eligible for a future flipped lane configuration. So you could invest that such that a future, paint job or slurry seal or reconfiguration would be facilitated. So
if you came back later, having not done that in near term, what would the comparable cost be to do it, to grind it down and to repave that portion? Ballpark.
I think it would be similar if you were just looking at pavement. They are grinding out, the current design specifies a 4-inch grind out and a 4-inch putback. And so that will correct some of the condition. It'll take out some of that quarter crown, but we would have to have the consultant sort of do that analysis to get there. But for future projects, if you're just talking about flipping the bike lane, you could look at targeting areas with other approaches, like modifying the curb gutter and picking it up to correct that grade, or doing something else than grinding out all your new pavement, because that does feel wasteful.
Is grinding out that quarter crown something that has to be done eventually anyway?
If the bike lane were to go there,
I mean, in the lifetime of the road, does it continue to get bad and then eventually you have to really change it?
No, it's not a structural issue with the pavement. It's just a slope issue for accessibility and other things. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I understand that you've only explored so much cost-wise, and I appreciate your answering the question.
So can I make a suggestion, which I don't think is a motion, but is that we ask for one more alternative at this really high level for Mr. Clock and his team to do a cursory sort of design of what it would take to put in the the paving improvements and the ADA improvements. And when I say ADA, I would assume that that means all 4 intersections. If we're not limiting it, we at least have to make better connectivity. So all 4, crosswalks at the intersection, and come back with any sort of fatal flaws on something like that. And also the cost comparison to the sort of base project or the base project with option A, which is essentially going with what we had but adding the 4th crosswalk. So my suggestion would be one more back to the drawing boards to see if there's some project that we can get in to utilize the funds and meet the settlement, while at the same time acknowledging that our commission would take it as a priority to revisit the active transportation plan to sort of have a more holistic vision or citywide discussion about sort of the priorities for complete streets and pedestrian and bicycle connections.
Can I ask you a clarifying question, Mr. Graham?
Miss Graham? Yeah, you can.
How can you describe how your ask for additional planning differs from option A? Is it just the number of bulb outs, or
You're not building any bulb outs because it's essentially becomes paint, which I think is the suggestion of one of the client or the people who spoke. So you're essentially reconstructing those intersections for drainage and for new ADA crosswalks. So there may be some curb and gutter that shifts a little bit to accommodate that, but for the most part, there's no bulb outs. And then the bulb out could be painted and using some vertical bollards to protect the pedestrian in that space, but then allow the bikes to still go through there because it's at grade with the street. Maybe Mr. Clock could, I think he gets what I'm saying. He might be able to say it in a more eloquent way.
I think it was perfectly understandable. Thank you.
I would just note the cost breakdown did provide a call out for the bulb outs. So I think you could get a rough sense of the cost of removing the bulb outs, unless Ernest, would you identify?
No,
any?
you can't, because a bulb out is like, you still need replacement curb and gutter there. So it's not like you just subtract the bulb outs, because he's still going to have to go in and redo the curb and gutter with all the ADA, or at least, right? Or sorry, I should have let you answer.
Yes, if I understand you right, you're saying just replace the curb ramps as is and accomplish a bulb out with striping and bollards.
Yeah, well, but I would assume you would, because of the grading, you still have to do curb and gutter there. All I was saying is, like, you can't, sorry, I didn't look deep into your cost estimate. I was just assuming that it's not like you would still be replacing curb and gutter on those. So it's not like a holistic delete like all linear feet of the bulb outs, because you still have half as much, it's just less. Never mind. I'll let you do the cost estimating.
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm reticent to talk about numbers even in the presentation, only because they're so high level. I mean,
I guess my point is only you have to still reconstruct the curb if you're going to be doing and gutter, probably for the other the primary goals of the ADA
Yeah,
and the paving.
all the curb gutter around the corners need to be done to,
Yeah.
to get those ramps compliant. Yeah.
So we could call that paint and ramps. Paint ramps and bollards.
Are you asking me?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. Yeah. Sorry, I think I misspoke. I think Justin was going to say that maybe it is the delta difference of the curb ramp of the bulb outs, but I mean, I guess the point is you still have to do work on the corners. That costs money.
Absolutely. Okay.
Chair, can I ask a question about the crowning of the crown of the road and adjusting that so that the bike lane would work if we put in a protected bike lane? Are there other advantages to that? So the slope of crossing at a crosswalk, say for a wheelchair user, are there benefits to putting that in, or are the crosswalk slopes fine?
So already accounted for in the originally presented option was correction of all the crowns in the crosswalks for ADA.
So
So
the
this
800,000
is,
would be the rest of the block.
it's between the intersections in the parking lane where you have this quarter crown that gets it greater than 5% cross slope.
Yeah.
And so that's just additional pavement grinding where you might grind out 6 inches and put back 4. And that lowers the overall road profile and allows you to get a under 5% cross slope in those areas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so the cost involved is in the further grinding out.
Yes. Yeah, mainly. And that requires more analysis. But the number that CSG came up with was about 800,000.
Okay. What I'm contemplating in my mind is if there's benefit in including that into this project, because really what you're then left with afterward is paint, making the flip between the parking lane and the cycle and the bike lane. But then the structure's all there. But it's an $800,000 cost, which is a trade-off, of course.
One other benefit that you get on smaller roads is the less crown you have, the more hydraulic capacity you have between the curbs. And so if you imagine a very steep crown road with a curb gutter, it has this much hydraulic capacity, but as you bring that down, it has more capacity to carry water. I wish it would rain so that we could see that in action, but that's another benefit on very narrow roads. This is a very wide corridor, so I don't know that it would be realized here, but that's another reason that roads are uncrowned if it were.
And that's accumulation of water and puddling above the curb line. Is that what the benefit would be?
Flooding,
okay.
Yeah.
Shamdal?
So a comment and a question. First off, I agree with Robert that trying to fix the corner crown makes sense to do it now rather than try to do it later and have to re-slurry the road or worse. And has the added benefit that if I'm picturing this correctly, if we only correct it at the crosswalks as you're riding down the existing class 2 bike lane, every time you get to a crosswalk, the bike lane dips into a new slope, and then you get into the area beyond it at the parking lane and you go back up. So I think we would, create a little bit, not exactly a roller coaster ride in the bike lane, but just more ups and downs. Not a huge deal, but all else being equal, it'd be nice not to have that.
There is a location that's like that now. At the
That's
southwest corner of
because
Curtis.
I've gone
Yeah.
over those.
Yeah.
Um, and
And
I've
it
seen,
goes into the driving lane, actually. It's a vehicle issue as well.
now, even some of the recent bulb outs or curb ramps on Solano have resulted in some roadway pavement surface fluctuations in the driving lane. So I think that's desirable. Yeah, it's on the order of 800,000. It's a big ticket item, but if it's one that we're going to tackle at some point anyway, probably better now than later. Certainly hopefully more cost effective to do it at once when we're doing the full blown paving effort rather than doing it standalone later. And then my question is that in the cost estimates, it talks about the bulb outs being $20,000 and the curb ramps $6,000. I assume those are additive. The bulb out does not include the curb ramp. A bulb out with curb ramp is 26,000.
Correct.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. So if we left the bulb outs out of the project, those are currently projected at $840,000. Coincidentally, really close to the cost of fixing the pavement cross slope. We keep all the curb ramps. That's totaling what, 390,000 under option A, if I recall. So, that's no net change. But I think that if we want to not put in the bulb outs now, so we preserve our options for later, we can also fix the cross slope now. And price wise, it's kind of a wash. Okay.
I see it that way. Yeah.
All right. I think that's a viable option. I would feel a little bit disappointed that we don't shorten the crosswalks physically, but I think, again, going back to not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, that's a compromise that probably makes sense.
Procedurally, in thinking about pushing any part of the project off, there's sort of two paths as I see it, or at least two paths. If we go the ATP route or the ATP revision route, then that's kind of a two-step. There would be a sort of a high-level study of the project and consideration for putting in the ATP, and then you would come back at some point and engage with the project and take it to the next level, which could be sometime later. Or you could say, this is something we want to do sooner. This is a project that needs to go forward ahead of any ATP revision.
Yeah, but I think what perhaps Commissioner Dravendal was saying is you could go forward with a revise that allows the ATP, allows for the potential for revisions more easily. And sort of in the long run, instead of going backwards and ripping out concrete, potentially putting in place the first step to a solution in the future.
And I didn't mean to take away from that. It sounds promising.
I also like the thought, Chairman Kosky, that you suggested of maybe we take on the planning of a complete streets program outside of the ATP, unless we're going to really be aggressive about advancing the ATP soon. You have, it's not Solano, it's not San Pablo in our city, but it's the next most important corridor, and probably warrants its own complete streets plan, significant enough that maybe it's advanced outside the ATP process.
Okay, so thinking about Commissioner Javadal's proposal or comments, however you want to phrase it, and thinking about what we can do within the scope of this project, we haven't talked about striping tonight. Are there opinions about striping around the bike lane?
Can we look at a cross section again and have staff show us what what is up for decision?
One sec. From beginning. Sorry, we'll go here. So the staff report details this 2-foot bike buffer as being, we can modify this width, taking an additional foot from the westbound lane and adding it there, or further shrinking the median and leaving these lanes. But it's really about, do you want us to look at grabbing half a foot or a foot from any available area to increase the size of this buffer?
I'd be comfortable going to 10-foot traffic lanes. We don't allow trucks on this road anyway. I think 10 feet's good enough for passenger cars instead of the 11.
The other piece of this was Commissioner Del Rosario raised the potential of moving the buffer to the travel lane side at the last discussion, and the potential with having a dual turn lane on one side and a buffer on the other, and increased level of comfort with being more aggressive on the travel lane width, because you do have the buffer on either side. So going down the lane might also be an easier ask with fire department, which we haven't discussed this with yet. But I think some places have even gone down to 9.5 feet when you do have buffer kind of conditions on both sides. So either doing that, if you had the extra foot, swapping it over to the bike lane side, or doing some kind of split and having a more aggressively narrow bike lane to position people in the center. You could sort of toy with exactly how you did the configuration, but that was the other component of it.
Go ahead.
And for a question for staff, did I see in the reports that there's potential for or staff looked at downhill having the buffer on the parking lane side, and then potentially uphill having it on the general purpose lane side?
That was proposed in one of the comments, public comments received. And in terms of thinking about the vehicles traveling faster than a parked car and that being the more danger, but if you're in a downhill condition where your cyclist is going faster, maybe they're more comparable in speed to the vehicles traveling adjacent, and maybe the parked car door is the higher danger in the downhill direction, was what they were discussing in that.
I think I see.
I support that differentiation. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over.
Sorry, no, I didn't raise my hand. I think I've seen this on Monterey in Brooklyn, that the buffer is on the street side going uphill.
Yeah, we've differentiated in places where uphill, we protect from the traffic lane. Downhill, we protect from the car doors. I think here, again, depending on if these numbers are exactly right, and it may vary a little bit from location to location. If we have a class 2 bike lane with a 2-foot door zone, we narrow the traffic lane to, gain another foot. We could also put a buffer on the traffic lane side. So what was already mentioned, the idea of a door zone buffer plus a traffic lane buffer really seems optimal. And if that, results in a slightly narrower marked bike lane, you're still not losing space, because most bike lanes, the door zone is essentially lost space anyway, even though it's not marked. Here we just mark it out. I mean, I like the idea of a 7-foot parking lane, a 2-foot door zone, whether a 4 or 5-foot bike lane fits, and a 2-foot buffer for the travel lane, 10-foot travel lane, 10-foot turn lane. I think that could really improve the safety.
I think the NACTO minimum is 18 inches for those buffers. So you could get 18 either side of your 5-foot bike lane.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 242 or 18-inch 5, 18-inch. Either one gets you there.
I like 242. I don't want to shrink the door zone.
I like the consistency so that people don't have to think about which side of the street they're driving on.
Sure. I like that too.
I like it when people remember what side of the street they're driving on.
I do too, but asking them to do that and expecting them to are two different things. I have a question about the painting, and this may be just an affect of the drawing, but it looks like the bike lanes are delineated in green, and I guess if we're putting a buffer on either side, there will be white lines anyway, but I love to see the white lines reinforce the green painting of the bike lanes, because the green wears off sooner. So are there other questions or comments about this option? We seem to be coalescing. Would anybody like to hazard a motion?
I will try a motion, and please remind me what things I leave out of it.
Great.
I propose that we move ahead with the project as proposed without bulb outs, but fixing the cross slope and including a bike lane with a 2-foot door zone buffer, 4-foot bike lane, and 2-foot travel lane buffer, and reducing the traffic lanes to 10 feet.
Can I add to that? That would be also implementing ADA improvements at all 4 corners. And and then I would also suggest striping of the bulb outs, although not physically making them out of concrete. Striping and protecting in some way.
I'm fine with the paint marked or striped bulb outs. Mr. Clock, any concerns about that, or does that sound okay?
No concerns. I just we just need to do some further study about what that actually looks like.
Okay.
I think people have something in their head about what it looks like, and then after you do the analysis, it looks different. But no, you're taking the bulb outs out, so the crossings are what they are,
right.
And striping could just be used to bring more visual cues to motorists to not cut corners, etc.
Let's make the painted bulb outs a suggestion to be evaluated and implemented if feasible. And maybe you could come back to us with just that as a standalone question later. And then the last part would be to plan for the complete streets process to be determined whether it's in or out of the ATP process. But I just want to be clear that that is intended as a next phase.
I'll just say also in public, to Mr. Clock's point, everyone has something in their mind, which I think is great. In my mind, I'm referring to the public comments, page 9. I think there's some interesting paint situation where they're trying to protect the bulb outs and narrowing the sort of perceived crosswalk of the pedestrian. Just thought I'd share since I had spoken a lot about it.
Hopefully we can pilot an intersection and see what that looks like and test it out. If there are no amendments to Commissioner Javandell's motion, I would second it.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll ask for a vote.
Commissioner Del Rosario,
Yes.
Commissioner Graham,
Yes.
Commissioner Javandell,
Aye.
Chair McCroskey.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great. Thank you, staff. Mr. Clark, appreciate it. And it sounds like we'll see you back.
Looking forward to it.
As
Good
always.
conversation. Thank you.
All right, well, that concludes item 5.1. Make sure I get this right. We'll move on to item 5.2, which is the draft commission work plan for 2001 through 2021 through 2023.
Thank you, Chair McCroskey. This item is continuing our discussion from March. The commission work plans are presented to council every 2 years for approval, and these guide advisory body actions and discussions for the 2-year period. Primary considerations include the council's strategic plan, city programs, policies, and plans, and workload and prioritization for commission activities. And the commission at the March meeting asked for a deeper dive in the capital project pipeline to understand the queue of projects, and I'll run through these briefly. Some projects are generally on an annual or ongoing cycle of design and construction. These include our street rehabilitation, the sidewalk repair program, traffic calming program, and intersection red curb installations. And we have a number of design projects in the queue for construction. These are identified here, but include our Albany intersections, safety improvements, San Pablo pedestrian improvements, as well as several others that have been discussed by the commission in the previous few years. There are several additional planned projects identified in the CIP for design and construction, and these include Solano Avenue short-term improvements, bridge resurfacing on Buchanan, and the North Albany traffic calming project. And then there are planning activities underway or identified as needed that could develop into future projects. And some of these were discussed in the first meeting and presented as potential work plan items. Some are outside agency efforts, including the San Pablo corridor study and coordination with UC Village. Others include the Pierce Street Path Segment 2 and Adams Street Bridge over Cerrito Creek, and the commission discussion about wayfinding and access improvement at the bulb. And they have related ATP projects associated with those. One additional update is that on May 17th, the City Council discussed, after some presentations from some of the other commissions and committees, revising the work plan template. And they haven't provided a new template, but they identified elements that we're expecting in a revision from the council, and that includes prioritizing the work plan items more specifically, and distinguishing between ongoing work and discrete items, and reporting on prior work plan items. So with that in mind, the commission didn't discuss this item last month, but the April memo included a second alternative that was based upon this discussion of the CIP project pipeline. In response to the council discussion and comments from the commission in March on possibly simplifying the work plan to focus on key priorities, we're proposing a third alternative that defers to the CIP on those projects that are identified there, to focus on the remainder of the commission's work. So that's the one I'll run through briefly now to start the discussion. This third alternative that was included in the memo tonight separates plans and policy work from the capital project development. So the plans and policies proposed for prioritization include the ATP update and COVID recovery, outdoor dining parklets policy, the street lighting evaluation, the new AC transit service plan that was mentioned at the previous meeting, and the sidewalk repair program prioritization update that is pending with results of new citywide survey. On the capital projects priority side, proposing the San Pablo Avenue corridor project. I included the Keynes and Adams Bikeway because it does involve evaluation with the pilot, so it's a little different than just the project delivery of some of the other projects. It will involve commission work on those evaluations. UC Village transportation connections may lead into developing projects associated with that in the coming couple of years, and the other projects that were identified previously. The ongoing work items that it calls out are serving as the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, managing on-street curb designations, reviewing safety data, and monitoring emerging mobility issues, and our ongoing work to update the municipal code and advising on legislation and policy. And then so in turn, the suggestion here is to fold all the capital improvement plan items that are really the sort of schedule and priorities are identified in that process, are just called out as an ongoing work plan is to deliver those projects. So I think this framing acknowledges the workload associated with those, but not really needing to revisit that prioritization that takes place in capital planning, and it allows the commission work plan to focus on communicating the other workflow items to continue that pipeline and the other policy and planning priorities. And so with that, seeking commission input on prioritization, and if ready, looking for direction to staff to prepare a final draft consistent with a revised format that we expect to be approved by City Council. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation.
Thank you. So let's start it with a round of questions, and then we'll do public comment and then bring it back to the commission. So are there questions from the commission? Mr. Del Rosario.
The UC Village transportation improvements staff, is that, I guess, what is that? Are those the bike path behind the ballpark, or is there other improvements there?
So it's not the Corneses Creek path. That one design is completed on. It is related to the reconstruction of the elementary school and the proposed housing development at Jackson and Monroe, where we're working with UC to discuss what active transportation connections our plans envision through there, and if there are opportunities to work with them in light of the project that they're developing, to create a project to help deliver some of those. So it's still a little early on that to know whether we have project work coming out of that, but we're identifying it because we are hopeful that there will be.
Thanks.
Other questions? Okay, then let's take it to public comment. This is the time to comment on this item. I already see a couple of hands raised. Let's start with Jeremiah Pinguello, and we'll go for 3 minutes per comment.
Jeremiah, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Bond. So this is the work plan for 2 years. And, you know, here we are just about halfway through the year, and we're still trying to figure out our work plan. But that's on every commission in Albany. It might take a year just to figure out our work plan. Isn't that unbelievable? It takes so long to figure out our work plan. That's bureaucracy for you. So I've been dealing with this work plan bureaucracy for about over 10 years now. And I just don't see school zones, school safety zones on here to be added to our municipal code. And I know I've mentioned this at this meeting countless times, and I know I've been told possibly that we have them now. Somebody wants to speak with me outside this meeting, which is fine, but I'm on the city's chartered code website right now, and I'm typing in school zones and I don't see nothing. So what is the municipal code? Is there, I mean, if you say it's in there, if you say we got school zones, what's the municipal code number? I mean, what is it? 20-7542? I mean, I've been in this meeting last month and you say, oh yeah, well, we have school zones already, Jeremiah, we took care of that. But I don't see them being implemented anywhere. You know, I don't see double fines. I don't see any reduced speed. I don't see any slower traffic around these schools. I still see 25 miles an hour. That's way too fast around our schools, you guys. I've been talking about this for over 10 years. It's like, how do I get through to the city? You know, what does it take? I already have 5,000 signatures at the city clerk to turn it into a measure. I was trying to turn it into a measure. One of the old mayors, she said she was going to make it measure S for school zone, so parents can vote yes on S. So, I mean, what does it take? Do I need to get more signatures? Just give me some direction, because I really want to get the city to have school zones. I mean, it's the only city in the Bay Area that doesn't have school zones. But we have the best school district, but we don't have school zones. It just doesn't make sense. It's obviously been overlooked. You know, school zones refers to the DMB, safety, reduce speed, not the school district. When I went to them, they said school zones. They'd bring me a map of the city with color coded, say, oh, these are school zones. If you live here, you go to the school. That's wrong. School zones are for safety. Please get it on the work plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Nick Peterson next.
Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm here as just a private citizen. I don't want this to be construed that I'm speaking for the Climate Action Committee, of which I'm a member. But one thing, as a citizen of Albany, I'm concerned about the rate at which Albany as a city is moving towards a more sustainable future and relying less on especially fossil fuel vehicles and just passenger vehicles in general for trips traveled and getting around and ferrying their kids to school and everything. So on that aspect, it seems like the Traffic Commission should have a high priority on active transportation, which we've been talking about, but just, I noticed you did have something about monitoring mobility. I think it said methods. I might not have gotten it right. I think actually, it would be interesting to see Albany actually encourage, solicit, and bring in alternative methods of transportation. I know at one point we had the Lime bike thing pop up and then disappear almost as quickly as it popped up. But there are other modes of transportation that are being tried out in other cities. Berkeley has the Ford Bike Loan Program. Other cities have electric scooters, electric bikes. Albany seems to not be doing that. And I think knowing how the Climate Action Adaptation Plan goes, I think it's important that we start to move away from a total dependence on cars. The idea that we'll just do a one-for-one swap out of ICE vehicles for EVs is unrealistic and actually misses the whole opportunity to make us a much more pedestrian and active transportation and healthy city. So I think it's imperative for the work plan to reflect that. We have limited amount of time to really get meaningful changes in place, and it's going to have to accelerate. So I guess what my appeal is that somehow there be a little bit more reference to changing transportation in Albany to be more sustainable and to support more sustainable methods of people accessing mobility, and that be done in an equitable and fair way. Somehow that is embraced by your commission. So thank you very much for letting me put that across. Appreciate hearing your comments on that.
Thank you. Ian McLeod.
Yes, hi, good evening again. Yeah, I wanted to make some suggestions for items to work on. I'm on the Planning and Zoning Commission, but please don't construe that I'm speaking on behalf of the commission. I'm speaking on behalf of myself. But what I'm really trying to address is kind of the silo effect of our different commissions. That on Planning and Zoning, we're working on a big plan for San Pablo Avenue, lots of housing, more residents. I'm really focused on transit-oriented development. And there are a lot of issues around creating new housing. Parking is one of them. Many residents who live nearby are concerned about overflow parking into their neighborhoods. So I think a residential parking permit program needs to be on your radar and needs to be engaged and get started on this. The other thing is that the bike parking requirements, we are going to have another requirement on San Pablo Avenue for new housing, but we don't have any updates for citywide bike parking. It's pretty minimal. It's very vague, the standard right now. I think that's part of your commission's responsibility, but I'm not sure. Maybe it's something that both commissions work on together. There's no requirement for cargo bikes, no requirement for charging stations. It's a pretty low standard. It should be upgraded to more bikes per unit. We are trying to create a sustainable transit network. And when we're doing transit-oriented development, having a protected, complete bike network is really, really key so that we can give people the option. We're trying to reduce parking requirements, trying to get people out of their cars or use transit instead of new residents showing up with lots of cars. So, in particular, having a protected bike lane system on San Pablo that connects to the rest of the city, that connects to El Cerrito, connects to Oakland through Berkeley is really important. It's all kind of trying to do this holistically. If planning and zoning does one thing, we say we're reducing parking for cars in these new housing developments, but then if people don't have anywhere to go outside their door on a protected bike lane, it's not helpful. Canes and Adams are helpful, but they're not sufficient. They're great if you want to bypass San Pablo Avenue, but they're not great if you want to be on San Pablo Avenue or go along San Pablo Avenue, visit all the same places that other drivers and motorists want to go to. So please consider that, all these things, and especially, bike permit, I'm sorry, a car parking permit system in neighborhoods starting around San Pablo Avenue and then perhaps thinking about the rest of the city. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I see we have Amy Smolens.
Thank you. Hello again. I just wanted to piggyback off what Mr. McLeod said. I live on Keynes Avenue, so a lot of my neighbors live in apartments, and they don't have safe places to put their bikes. And some of them said they've gotten them stolen. They keep them kind of up on along the railing. They've gotten stolen. Back when it used to rain, they would get rained on, and a lot of them just give up and don't have bikes. They have nowhere to keep them. They can't stuff them in their apartment. So I think that a real plan for housing and new apartments is important. If you look at, I've been in some of those new El Cerrito apartments or condos, those developments on San Pablo, and they have a ton of bike parking. Some have more than twice as many bike spaces as car spaces. They've got secure bike rooms. They have double-decker, they just have all sorts of facilities. One of them, even at least one, has a bike workroom as an amenity in their on the ground floor. So they're really doing things to facilitate people wanting to ride bikes instead of drive cars and being able to use those as transportation. So yeah, I think we really need to, Albany doesn't have a plan. And if we're planning on doing development along San Pablo and more on Solano or creating more fourplexes or things like that, we have to have a plan for how can we reduce car parking? How can we reduce our greenhouse gases? And to do that, we need to really facilitate people being able to ride e-bikes and regular bikes and cargo bikes. And you guys, I hope you'll come up with a plan. Look at what El Cerrito's doing. I'm not sure how they do it, but all their new developments have just a ton of bike parking. It's really, really impressive. So I hope you'll address that. Thank you.
Thank you. Looks like we're past 9:30. Was that our cutoff? I forgot. I'm sorry.
I can make a motion to extend to 10 p.m.
Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Chavadel seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Measure passes. Great. So bringing the work plan back to the commission. Thanks for those comments to the public. And we might first look at which format we want to go forward with. I'm looking at alternative 3. Is that acceptable to the other commissioners? Great. That was easy. Who wants to make comments first?
I have a question related to Mr. McLeod's comments in terms of bike parking and actually just all transportation demand management items. Is it within our purview or is it with the, I guess I had thought that was a zoning issue. And I guess I'm wondering, per the comment of siloing, like who does own that? And because I agree with him that someone should take those items on, especially where we stand right now. So is it within our purview? I mean, I guess it's always our purview to make suggestions, but if it's zoning items, doesn't it technically live in planning and zoning?
I can address that question. Yes, you're right that if you were to discuss the regulatory requirements on new development, that would live within municipal code in chapter 20, which the way that's drafted, the Planning and Zoning Commission takes the lead on making recommendations to the city council. You can certainly weigh in on it that as appropriate. So to take Mr. McLeod's suggestion, I will get in touch with him, and he is a commissioner on the Planning and Zoning Commission. So that is something that we can address on his commission. You would be in that loop on as another interested commission to avoid the siloing effect, but I would let them take the lead.
Yeah, I'd be interested in possibly having a joint meeting or joint workshop when the San Pablo project gets to the land use and transportation portion, which I believe is coming up.
Yeah, and just to follow up, I mean, I think it's not just bike zoning. I mean, it's like all transportation. I mean, it's a transportation demand management plan, right? So it's bigger. I mean, it's so, and I don't know if like that would be something that would be in our purview, but we should figure that out and figure out who owns it or co-hosts it or something. But so I would support, I guess where I'm going with this is, well, I very much appreciated the third alternative of the work plan and am supportive of it, in addition to adding something on, transportation demand management planning. And then also just sort of this other potential Marin Avenue complete streets project or study, whatever we want to call it, that we were talking about earlier. So.
Sorry, I'm jotting notes. Thank you.
While Chair McCroskey's doing that, just to clarify, I would say that we do have a rather dated transportation demand management program in the municipal code. I would say that does fall within the Transportation Commission's purview. I forget exactly what chapter it's in, but it's not the planning and zoning chapter.
And we should put it on our planning and policy list of things to do, would be my suggestion.
Great. Who's next? Javandal?
I don't think this actually changes our work plan, but it's worth mentioning because it's come up in the past that there exists a permit parking policy. It just has never been implemented, and that becomes another one of those things that planning and zoning could have a development project incorporate as one of their conditions of approval, that the project take the lead on establishing a permit parking district for the area surrounding the project. Because I know staff is pretty busy and they don't have the time necessarily to take that on, but if a developer comes in who's going to cause the problem, it seems fair to use a condition of approval for them to help fix it. It doesn't mean they necessarily have to pay the permit fees in perpetuity, but getting it set up can absolutely be something I would hope that can be done through the planning and zoning process. If they want to check in with the Transportation Commission, that's fine, but I don't feel that we are necessarily going to add a lot of specific knowledge to it. If there's questions, we'll happily answer them, but the policy exists. So
the policy exists. I think we're the only body that's recently considered implementing
right.
it. And we also oversaw the parking study on Solano Avenue and parts of San Pablo. So I think we have some value to add.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to remind the commission that we did do, as Chair McCroskey mentions, we did do a study in 2017 that looked at, that's primarily in Solano and San Pablo and to some degree on side streets from there. And I think to summarize the conclusion, the occupancy rates were not, I think we're around 60% on average citywide. And so that raises the question of kind of whether, well, how could a program be effective with relatively low occupancy rates? And then given the scale of the city, I think another one of the conclusions was it really would need to be a citywide program. If it's a very localized program, you're just pushing the problem out a block or two, And then the third aspect is the enforcement part of that, which is not something the police department currently has the capacity to do. So it's an expansion of staffing and equipment and so forth. We're happy to revisit that. It comes up a lot. It comes up all the time. I don't think the parking situation in Albany has changed dramatically in the last 5 years or 4 years or whatever it is. And I just also note that most of these programs, the legacy programs, are really designed to help people park their cars and to be able to get a parking space and help them use their cars, which may not actually be the intent of where we're going with a more contemporary approach where we want people to consider other forms of mobility. So I think we may need to spend some time with this at some point. I'm not sure we have the staff capacity to do it in the immediate future, but we do hear it all the time. And I think it's not as simple as just selling parking permits. Unfortunately, I think it would be a more substantial task.
And Mr. Bond is at the planning and zoning meetings to share that information every time. So Commissioner Jovenel, did you have more?
No, I agree with everything that Mr. Bond has said. You know, I'm in charge of a residential preferential parking program in Berkeley. It costs a lot to run. It loses money every year. And it prioritizes parking for people who already live here at the expense of people who want to move here. It is just shifting the burden around. Again, I don't need to rehash everything that Jeff said. I just agree.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's you know, permit parking is part of the scope. You know, I think we adopted a first time bike parking requirements for multi-unit housing, and it is looking pretty dated. And if I did sit in for the presentation last night of the current San Pablo project planning, and one of the things that struck me was that you know, after there are a certain number of bike racks, some of them must accommodate long tail bikes. Well, what do you do if you live in a smaller complex and you have a long tail bike? You know, so just there's been a lot of change and a lot more electric bikes in the last few years. So looking at the requirements, I think is warranted in the near term. And they were also discussing some ideas like dedicated pickup and drop off locations for Uber deliveries. And those may look different than just our previous green zones, but maybe they would be the same, I don't know. So there's a lot going on in terms of limiting the number of vehicles and increasing the amount of alternative transportation. Commissioner Del Rosario, do you mind if I just keep talking since I've already started? Or would you like to take a turn?
Yeah, I had a thought, but I can wait.
Okay, thank you. Our public comment speaker speaking on school safety zones is not the only person who's talked to me about that. And we have previously looked at school safety zones, but because there was a limitation as to the number of streets that we could actually affect around our schools, we made a decision along with some other factors to sort of table that. But I've come back to the thought that even on non-major streets, on side streets, school zones are one of the only tools that we have where we can legally reduce the speed. So I'm actually in favor of putting that back on our work plan. So I put that forward for your consideration. I'm in agreement with, we talked about Marin Avenue complete streets. I think we need to elevate that onto the work plan. And other than that, I find that as drafted in alternative 3, it's pretty complete. I'm sure whoever's all right.
Thanks. I just wanted to quickly ask the question of what you were talking about, Ken, with curb management. Is that folded in under the second bullet point on ongoing work items, plans and policies, which says manage regulation of on-street parking and curb designations? I assume that it is. So we have been thrusted into this different use and need to manage curb for food drop-off, pickup and drop-off, which seems to be something that's going to stick around, as well as the ride share, which is what I think we talked about last year. So I just want to make sure that that's all incorporated in there. I don't think it needs to be spelled out, but as long as it keeps it open-ended that way, and also looking at curb management at the schools.
Yeah, I think that could encompass that. That's good. Commissioner Javanel?
Just one quick request. I'm fine with discussing the reduced speed limit school zones, but can we please include the words reduced speed limit in the item name? Because school zones are a completely different thing.
So how would you phrase that again?
Reduced speed limit school zone. Because the whole concept of a school zone already exists and has nothing to do with the reduced speed limits. It's the reduced speed limits we're interested in. Let's talk about that, not about, all the crosswalks within 600 feet of a school are yellow because it's a school zone by default under the vehicle code. I just want us to be clear what it is we're talking about.
Great. Thank you. So going kind of in order, we had transportation demand management plan.
Well, I think that relates to sort of updates to the municipal code could relate to that bullet point as well, so.
Yeah, I've been on this commission for over 10 years, and I'm not sure exactly what comes under transportation demand management plan. So it's obviously been a while. And if that fits under the code, that's great. Do we need to add anything to make that more clear?
I don't know. I guess I would personally just leave that one up to staff. I do think given like the push for more development all along San Pablo, like we do need something because it essentially pushes the developers to figure out how to deal with reduced parking rates that I would hope we enforce or have as maximums rather than minimums. So.
Yeah, the Planning and Zoning Commission is strongly engaged in that.
Yeah. So I don't know, Jeff.
There are a number of areas in the municipal code, kind of setting aside the planning and zoning requirements on new development. There is a number of sections that are quite dated. And the commission looked at this, I don't know, maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago. And my suggestion is we bring that list back to you so you could refresh your memories. And for those of you who weren't on it, could see that list. And I'm not sure off the top of my head, I'm not sure if the TDM sections are the highest priority about revisiting some of those things. It might be, but maybe just keeping it more generic with the understanding that when we bring that to you, you'll see TDM and some other things that you may want to dive into as well.
So covered by the current item. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Where do we want to put the Marin Avenue complete streets consideration? would that come under plans and policy, under priority work items, or under ongoing work items? And I want you guys to speak freely at this point. But go ahead and just jump in.
Seems like plans and policies, priority items.
Suggestions of ranking? Is that more important than number 5, than number 4, than number 3?
Is this, I'm sorry, is the list meant to be ranked here or just to show these are our top 5 priorities?
Both.
You know, oh, was that the answer you were going to give, Justin?
I'm sorry.
I didn't catch. It's meant to be ranked, but it is true that it's sort of divided into 2. So I'm not sure if capital projects are really lower priority just because they're a different category. So maybe it's a little, I don't know.
I hear you.
Not being given a template to go on. I was picking one. There's reasons to go either way on that. And we could be maybe clearer on capital projects. These are things that aren't in the CIP. So, you know, a study on Marin Avenue specifically maybe is more in line with those that are teeing up projects versus the other plan. It could, yeah, however you see fit to communicate.
It's true. It obviously hasn't been identified for funding yet. We're proposing it to council essentially.
If I could ask a brief question of the commission just for clarification, and given the choice between an active transportation plan and a Marin complete streets plan, do you have a strong preference which goes first? My thought is, for us, I think as a planning tool, we really do need a new active transportation plan, because the kind of things that we're talking about on Marin, we may find ourselves having a similar conversation on other streets, and a good active transportation plan is a tool we'll use all over the city. But if you feel otherwise, it'd be good to hear that feedback.
Thoughts?
No, I agree with you.
We're getting head nods. I agree in principle, but if we don't get funding or grant money for a active transportation update in the near future, I think we might have to start breaking out projects like this, just to keep things moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, if it's a high enough priority for the city council and the commission, we can use the city's funds to begin an active transportation planning process.
We currently have it ranked as number 1. So I'd propose that we put a Marin Avenue complete streets plan, which could potentially be folded into the active transportation planning process, on the first page under capital projects as 6.5. Is that too specific?
So after San Pablo Avenue, is that where you're thinking?
Yes. How does that sound?
Yeah, that looks good.
Sure. I'm assuming we have the ability to take it as it goes, as long as it's sort of in here, depending on what happens. So sounds good to me.
Nobody tracks us down on a meeting by meeting basis.
Well, okay.
Or it hasn't happened yet.
I know I was trying to think of a good funny comeback, but my humor's waning because it's past my bedtime.
Fair enough. And that reminds me, we're almost at 10 o'clock. And I need another motion.
Motion to continue to 10:15.
Can I get a second?
Like that.
Sorry?
I'll second it as long as we keep moving quick.
Fair enough. All in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed?
Yes,
Sorry, still carries.
I know. Let's
Okay.
go.
Thank you for your patience. Right. So is there anything on here about bike parking requirement update? I'm not seeing it. Does the commission feel that it's important to keep our bike parking requirements current? Is that something we should put on the work plan?
I would assume it falls under updates to the municipal code. Are we talking about for new development or for like within the city?
I think we were talking, I had in mind new development. When you say within the city, what do you mean?
I meant like city standards for sidewalks and such.
Yeah, I'm not sure there is one for city sidewalks and such. So let's stick with or perhaps you want to include that in the proposal.
No.
But, then let's.
I
stick
mean, I
with-
think, would it be, is it part of the municipal code, Jeff?
There is currently in the planning and zoning code section, planning and zoning chapter, bike parking requirements, and the planning and zoning commission would normally take the lead on updating that.
Yes, but we could advise them on it.
You could make a recommendation that they start that, or if they start that on their own initiative, you could review it and comment on it.
Yeah. All I'm saying is I think it falls under bullet point number 5, under plan ongoing work items.
And it's part of TDM
There you go.
and covered already.
Great. Then moving on. What have I left out? School zones. I'm sorry. Reduced speed limit school zones.
Thank you.
I think we're back on the last page. Shall we add a bullet under plans and policy, one up from the bottom? Investigate reduce speed limit school zones as a speed reduction measure. General nodding. Can I see a shaking of head if needed? We're in agreement. Great.
This is between 4 and 5.
Yes.
2, 3, 4, 5. It's between 5 and 6 on the 3rd page under plans and policy.
Under ongoing work items.
Isn't this new, Ken?
Yes, ongoing work items, plans and policies between dot number 5 and 6. Am I miscounting?
No, I was just thinking of this not as an ongoing work item, but as a standalone item.
If you think that's more constructive, I would consider it, but I'm good with it there.
Okay.
Any other suggestions for the work plan?
The curb management that Robert was discussing, you said falls under the ongoing curb designation item?
Think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any items you want to take out since you're at it? I have to ask.
It's a fair question. Are there? If we gave Fareed enough time, we could come up with one, but everybody wants to leave. I think we're ready for a motion.
I don't think you need to take a motion this evening because we're going to have to bring this back to you with the final council approved format. So you'll get one final shot at it next month, probably.
Okay. Great. With that, then, I would like to close the item. And we have item number 6, announcements from staff and the commission.
I had a couple announcements. One was that City Council did approve support for AB 550 and AB 43. But when we submitted the letters of support, we were notified by Assemblymember Chu's legislative aide that for AB 550, the automated speed enforcement, that it's stalled in the Assembly appropriations, at least for this cycle. Other update is that the traffic calming policy update that the commission recommended to council will be going to council at the June 7th meeting. Those are my announcements.
Commissioner announcements. I have one. Albany Pride is going to be chalking crosswalks at Cornell and Solano. I'm sorry, Talbot and Solano, at Brighton and San Gabriel, and in the Crescent by the pool, which is the unofficial drop-off zone by the pool, to celebrate Pride Month near our schools. And they'll be doing that this coming Monday morning.
Am I allowed to make an announcement on behalf of my day job?
Sure.
Yeah, well, Link 21, which is the new Trans-Bay Rail Crossing program, is going to have public workshops starting in June, and there's one, it will be virtual, being held for the Alameda County on Tuesday, June 22nd in the evening. I can probably forward to staff information.
That'd be great. That's exciting. Sorry, we didn't catch that last thing you said. It was between the meetings.
Oh, sorry, I said I'll be there.
Great. Congratulations on the progress. Great. Future agenda items. Do commissioners have, well, first of all, staff, what can we expect on upcoming agendas?
We have in the queue look at the 2020 collision data that is available. We'll be bringing that to the commission in the coming month or two. We'll be taking a look at the next round of pavement management cycle to see if there are any items to try to bring in advance of design, if there's a couple of things to bring for commission discussion, I think. And still unclear on the Ocean View encroachment, whether that's coming back to the commission, and we'll bring you a final work plan draft next month. And then I was just going to relay one, Commissioner Fong did want to add as a future agenda item request. He wasn't able to make it tonight, but was interested in outdoor dining post-COVID being a discussion for a future agenda meeting.
Were ongoing on-street issues related to dining already on sort of our work plan or agenda for the future? I thought I remembered seeing that.
I saw it there, number 2 under plans and policies.
Yep. So we got that. Does it make sense to review those soon, or what would staff suggest on that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think certainly later this summer or fall, there is some legislation that's working its way through the state legislature that might affect how this is, what the city's choices are. And there are a number of other cities that are exploring this at the same time we are. So I'm not sure if it will be ready for June, but I do know that there will need to be some policy decisions about this later in 2021.
So as staff you'll be monitoring that, and you'll let us know if we need to jump ahead and do something in July before August recess, or it'll come later. Great. Thank you. Any other commission requests? Yes.
Not necessarily an agenda item, but is there a date when we would go back to meeting in person?
Not yet. We're certainly talking about it, but we don't have anything ready to announce.
I will likely be traveling in June, but intending to chair the meeting. Great. Well, so we only used 2/3 of the time that was allotted at the last point. So I want to thank you all for sticking around and for your efforts on items tonight and our work plan going forward. And I look forward to seeing you all in June.
Thanks all.
Good
Thanks,
night.
Dan. Take care.